I mean, well, quite simply, I'm here because the plight of the troops and the plight of the veteran is the same as the plight of the public worker, because our troops and veterans, you know, they either are or were public workers, and I mean, if you Americans love to say that they support the troops, but in order to support the troops, logically, you would have to support public workers. I mean, just because the military is not allowed to unionize does not make us any less of a public worker, and therefore, you know, Iraq veterans against the war stand in solidarity with public workers whose rights are being curtailed. I mean, as a soldier, it's believed among the populace that the job of the soldier is to protect the rights of the citizens, and that's exactly what we're doing. Our duty to serve our country does not end once we leave active duty, and really that's why we're here. We would encourage the National Guard to refuse any orders to move against working people or veterans, because a lot of working people, a lot of the workers here are veterans. There's a union labor has a strong contingent of veteran workers, and so it would be an egregious offense to see the National Guard potentially attack their own. Labor unions traditionally have supported the Democratic Party, and so there's also political overtones that go along with this, and so I think we need to realize that you know, we shouldn't be using the National Guard for political ends. I mean, it's not a good idea for the morale of troops or for the security of this nation to politicize the Army, the military in general. And so Governor Walker runs the risk of politicizing our troops with that action, and that's something very scary and very dangerous. Well, yeah, I mean, this is really a distraction. They want you to look over here, so you're not looking over here. I mean, the state of Wisconsin alone has contributed about $2.7 billion to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. These wars are wars that polling shows the American people do not have any interest in pursuing any longer. Yet, you know, Wisconsin residents are paying a very high toll. And the amount of money that Wisconsin residents have been contributing to this wars, you know, it dwarfs the amount of money that Scott Walker is trying to save by neutering union workers of their rights. So it's a distraction. I mean, the U.S. military spends more on their defense budget annually than all other nations with defense budgets combined. It's ridiculous. Even if we chop the defense budget in half, we would still dwarf all other nations. I mean, China is, I think, the nation with the second largest defense budget. Ours is probably hovering around $800 billion a year, depends on how you calculate it, whereas China has about $60 to $80 billion. We won't even let anybody approach parity when it comes to defense spending. But see, that's the taboo argument, and that's something in political discourse that you just don't talk about. You don't talk about defense spending because then it's inferred that you're harming the troops, which is a fallacy. I mean, these exorbitant amounts that we spend on the defense budget have nothing to do with salaries or gear. It's all about these weapon systems, these weapon projects. It's about overseas bases. It's about maintaining the empire. That's why we spend exorbitant amounts on our military. And every democracy, when it comes down to it, has to make one key decision. Do we go in the direction of preserving our democracy, or do we preserve the empire? And given, I mean, just looking at the amount of the amounts, the hundreds of billions of dollars that we spend maintaining our empire, it's going to come come to the point where we're going to have to make that decision, just like France did, just like Great Britain did, just like every empire has done, where we're going to have to either choose democracy or the empire. And I think with the rise, I mean, we're seeing an awakening in unions checking corporate power, and really that's what's behind the military-industrial complex is corporate power. So it looks like we're going to have to address the question of whether we keep our democracy or our empire, and it looks like it's coming soon. You know, and unchecked corporate power is something that I'm intimately familiar with. When I was deployed to Iraq in 2004, I experienced almost a purely corporate war. I was in telecommunications, and whenever our radios would break down, we would have General Dynamics come and fix them, even though we deployed with soldiers whose specialty was to do just that, to fix our radios. If I wanted to eat, if I wanted to clean my clothes, I would go see Halliburton. If our trucks broke, and I should mention that, you know, we had cooks, we had laundry service soldiers deployed with us. Corporations, you know, gave us our mail. When our trucks would break down, we would take them to Raytheon, even though we were deployed with plenty, you know, of light-wheeled and armored mechanics to take care of the job. There were as many corporate contractors deployed in 2004 as there were soldiers. So when I was deployed in 2004, I experienced a purely corporate war, and you know, I come back from war to see that corporations not only have their reach overseas. I mean, the U.S. has between 750 and 1,000 overseas bases, and corporations, private contractors supply those bases, but then I come home and I see unchecked corporate power and such things as the Koch brothers' influence on state governors, such as Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin. And so there's a continuation. And I didn't agree with, you know, the overreach in corporate power when I was deployed to Iraq, and I don't agree with it now, and that's why I'm here standing in solidarity with public workers who are showing that there's a countervailing force against this growth in corporate power that we just have not seen since the Gilded Age. Yeah. I mean, corporations are not accountable to anybody but stockholders. You can say what you want about government, but it is potentially democratic. And so if we're going to have the power anywhere, we need to separate, we need to keep it in government, and we need to have a strict separation of corporation and state. And that's something that we don't have anymore. The power of corporations and the power of the state have seemed to bleed together. And that's something that's probably more alarming than anything. You know, it's been said that the government is a shadow cast by business over society, and I truly do believe that. You know, as I said, there's been a bleeding of where power comes from. Does it come from the state, or does it come from these corporate high priests that seem to rule the day? And more, as we're seeing here, and as evidenced by the relationship between Governor Walker and the Koch brothers, is it's hard to really see where power is originating. Is it originating from moneyed interests like corporate America, or is power rested with the people and within the political process? And it's starting to become more and more difficult to see where the line is. Labor union numbers have been on the decline ever since the 60s and 70s, and they only make up about 16% of the working force. So if we allow labor unions to get any weaker, we really run the risk of losing labor as a credible countervailing force against corporate power. And so this is really kind of a turning point for American labor. They can either get stronger by accomplishing their goals here, or get weaker, and I don't think they can afford to get weaker. Iraq Veterans Against the War is pleading with the National Guard to refuse any orders to move against labor unions because we're one, and I think I explained that earlier, that soldiers and veterans are public workers. The National Guard, not only are they public workers, but they're working. They're workers in general. I mean, they do both. They have civilian jobs and they have federal jobs. And so the National Guard, they're comprised of workers, veterans work. These are our working brothers behind us, and we have to stand together. If we do not stand together, there's a scary chance that labor could be weakened to a point where all kinds of unfair, unjust policies can be enacted that really hurt the American working class, the American middle class, worse than it is already. And America's middle class is struggling, and the American middle class was built on the backs of labor unions, and that's something that I think is getting lost in the conversation. If it weren't for labor unions, we wouldn't have things like the 40-hour work week, we wouldn't have weekends, we wouldn't have child labor laws, we wouldn't have overtime, we wouldn't have these things that have allowed us to have a strong middle class. And it seems like the American dream is getting farther and farther. It's looking to become an unattainable goal if we don't fight for our rights to bargain, fight for our rights to control our own destinies. And that's what this is ultimately about, controlling our own destinies.